This is Comic Shenanigans, episode 1085, Book of the Month Club, Daredevil Batman, and Daredevil Black Armor.
Ain't no stopping them shenanigans. Love getting into shenanigans. All up in them shenanigans. 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 Shenanigans.
Welcome to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. This is episode 1085. It's Book of the Month Club, Daredevil and Batman, and Daredevil Black Armor. I am your host, Adam Chapman. I'm joined by Nathan Struck, who's along for the ride this time around. We don't have Paul Spores with us, so instead, because Daredevil Born Again is once again, Daredevil is back on our TV screens as part of Daredevil Born Again, we thought we'd do a Book of the Month Club about Daredevil. Specifically, we're focusing on two books published, almost 30 years apart. By D.G. Chichester. He didn't publish them, he wrote them. We're talking about Daredevil Batman, which is now relatively easy to get your hands on in the Marvel vs. DC Omnibus. And then the Daredevil Black Armor miniseries, finished up in early 2024 and is easily available on Marvel Unlimited and in trade paperback format as well as singles if you can find them. So Nate, we have an interesting kind of love of, adoration, I would say, of the Daredevil Fall from Grace period. I know that it meant a lot to you when you were younger. I know that Scott McDaniel's art especially was a very strong connection with you. You actually own a piece of Scott McDaniel art from Green Goblin, which also meant a lot to you, from the mid-90s. So I'm curious what it was like before you read these books. How much did you know, one, about the crossover and also about the more recent miniseries that DG had written about Daredevil?
How much did I know? In this DC versus Marvel omnibus, most of these crossovers I didn't know about. I really didn't keep up with them. I mean, like the Muhammad Ali Superman bout, Superman Spider-Man. Yep, I think I saw issues of Daredevil Batman, the Bagley stuff, in my local comic book store at the time, and it's weird because with DC versus Marvel versus DC, the crossover event in the 90s and then the amalgam stuff, which I really got into and was formative for me. You'd think it would lead me to stuff that had come before, but it was really just this blind spot. I had no idea. So even like when we did our episode on the Teen Titans X-Men crossover, I commented there at the time, this is not at all like the Access kind of conceit where the universes are crossing over and this is how these people are meeting. It was just like, yep, they exist in the same universe. There's this kind of weird DC Marvel blend, and they've always been this way, and they kind of already know each other, which is apparently ongoing. Like, I think I don't know how far back this goes, but maybe with the first crossover, they just chatted and said, look, rather than wasting pages on explaining it, this is its own timeline. This is its own kind of universe. So I didn't know this existed till I got the omnibus, and I was flipping through it, and I'm like, hey, I love McDaniel. I know Chichester, and this is Batman in it, and it has Daredevil, and that's pretty cool. Not Daredevil in the Black Armor, unfortunately. I kind of would have loved to see more of that, but still, McDaniel draws the red costume in the Green Goblin issue, issue 4, I believe, and that's fun. It's still fun to see him draw it in red. New for me, and then Black Armor, I saw the solicits. We had talked about it. So I hadn't read it yet, but I knew it was a thing, and I was interested and excited to read it because who doesn't love mid-90s costume changes?
I mean, we love them quite a lot.
Yeah, you and I do, that's for sure.
So it's interesting about this one shot. So one thing that immediately struck me, just looking at the opening page with the credits and kind of a quick rundown on who Batman is and who Daredevil is, it's interesting that I think this is the only one I remember seeing, and I'd have to look at the other crossovers now, that actually had the Elseworlds tag at the bottom of the credits page, which is very different than most others. And it even says, in Elseworlds, heroes are taken from their usual settings and put into strange times and places, some that have existed or might have existed and others that can't, couldn't, or shouldn't exist. The result is stories that make characters who are as familiar as yesterday seem as fresh as tomorrow. I don't remember ever seeing that on any other crossover before.
But I have limited experience, but the stuff I have seen or kind of parsed through in this collection, yeah, it's interesting. They just kind of that's cool. They should have always been what ifs and Elseworlds, right? But I guess crossovers predate those imprints, right?
It is interesting because, and I think I got into this when I interviewed Ron Mars recently, but the idea that on the one hand, you want to use the evergreen versions of these characters because it's never going to get referenced in continuity. So it's just going to be a standalone story to have fun. At the same time, they were publishing these books to try and get people to read their books. Like, you know, they wanted people to be, oh, I'm going to read Daredevil Batman. Oh, I'm kind of interested in this Daredevil guy. So they wanted it to reflect what Daredevil was like at the time to a degree so that it would get them to buy that book. And which makes sense from a marketing perspective, but it's interesting kind of balance when you're kind of managing multiple different things when you're publishing a book. It's interesting too, because if you think about the timing of this, you know, Chichester hadn't been writing Daredevil, I believe, for a little while when this crossover came out. Obviously he had been a recent writer of Daredevil, so it's interesting to see him being paired up with McDaniel again, who again, I believe he had kind of moved on from Daredevil at this point. I'd have to get my chronology a little bit more correct, but, I did like the use of Two-Face. I thought that made sense for multiple reasons to kind of give him a background with Matt in some way because they're both lawyers and also obviously he's a classic Batman villain. The use of, you know, the Daredevil choice left a little, not to be desired, but more just kind of a head scratcher. Like I thought it would have been, why wouldn't you use Kingpin or something like that? Like it felt like that would have been a better fit, or even Bullseye. It was kind of an interesting direction to go with Hyde, which is interesting when we get to Black Armor, is that we say Hyde again in a very different context. It's almost like Chichester really likes using Hyde, and I don't think he did a bad job writing him. It was just more of a head scratcher that of all the Daredevil pantheon of characters to bring into a crossover with Batman, you'd think it would be kind of the A-list villains, or as close as he gets to A-list, as opposed to someone like Mr. Hyde. Yeah,
not even the Owl. And you're right, like, he says, I need someone. And it's good to give the artist some variety in the size of the different characters and some, like, you know, for, like, blocking or crafting the scenes. But, like, yeah, it's interesting that it's him both times, Hyde both times, which suggests, yeah, you're right. That's a good inference, that it's a Chichester favorite. It's possible that he asked McDaniel, what do you want to draw? I mean, that would be what I would want to hear if I was the artist. Like, it really doesn't matter here, but I assume that each of these studios, or each of the companies rather, this is all getting passed back and forth, but the editors have to sign off on everything. It's important to them that they get maybe popular villains in front of readers so that it will stimulate growth or readership. And, Two-Face, yeah, people will see something that they are familiar with. And I just can't imagine Mr. Hyde in this portrayal was enough to get someone to go, oh, I've never heard of this Daredevil guy, but give me some Calvin Zabo, whatever his name is. I also thought it was interesting, like in this introductory page, Eye for an Eye, that at the bottom of each of the character bios has in big block, bold letters, it gives kind of like a summary. And I thought the summaries just, they feel off. And it's because he cares that Daredevil protects his city with such reckless idealism. I'm like, oh, is that what he has? Reckless idealism? And then Batman's still, Gotham is still no paradise, but the suffering's been eased some. Oh, has it? Okay. Because now those skyscraper canyons belong to the Batman. I'm like, I don't think that's what any of the Batman comics are at all. I think they're about how there's constant mayhem and new villains all the time and old ones breaking out of Arkham and turning people into, like, you know, killer crocs and puppet people and laughing gas. But interesting kind of, I would think with those summaries that would also be their last chance to kind of really grab the reader and be like, wow, I want to dive into this. Mm-hmm. Maybe I want to know more about this reckless idealism. I don't know. It does make me wonder. I mean, I don't think the credits are on, at least not in the reprinting. I don't know if the editor information is there. I'd probably have to look maybe somewhere else in the book to see who actually edited it. But it is an interesting choice that would have been made by the editor at that time. Looking it up on comics.org, it does look like the editor was maybe Ralph Macchio, but also maybe a bunch of other people. Like, there's a lot of people who are kind of involved with this, so it's hard to tell who was the one kind of doing hands-on to kind of add this type of material, but it's definitely an interesting take. I don't imagine it was Chichester who wrote it himself. Yeah, I don't know. Just interesting, because it does seem to have a different voice than what's written in the main story. So I would be surprised if it was Chichester.
Now, interestingly enough, I did check. This did come out in 1997, so this is, a bunch of years later after we've already had. Chichester's already wrapped up his run on Daredevil at that point, so he's not actively working on the character. Chichester isn't either. We've already had Green Goblin at this point. Green Goblin has already come and gone. Because it would have ended in late 96. So McDaniel's not doing that anymore. So it's interesting. It's interesting because we think, I guess a lot of people at the time would have thought of them as being really, Daredevil creators. And so it's been a few years since they've been associated with Daredevil, but now they're working on this one shot. So I'm curious about that. And obviously I'm going to be talking with, Chichester soon. And I would like to kind of know how he kind of got in the mix, because it's not like he was the current writer at that point in time working on the book.
Yeah. It is nice to see McDaniel back at it again. I was thinking as I was flipping through the pages, just kind of like marveling or enjoying his art. Everything is triangles. I think that's kind of what I've decided. Batman is just made of triangles. The faces are kind of triangles. The textures or the veins or the musculature, everything's just kind of this. He's got this wonderful. It's almost like polygons. Like polygons are all the, especially on the Sega Saturn. Were triangular rather than, I think, squares. Are they square now? I don't know. And so it just kind of has a certain feeling to it when you look back at some of those old games. And in some ways, he kind of draws characters. I know this might be maybe a weird comparison, but to me, they're almost like early PlayStation 1 renderings of people. And I just love it. I love how like the shoulder cape of Batman gets pointy in zany ways, almost very Azrael type ways. And that's something that we saw also in Green Goblin, that he would have these giant kind of curling up, almost impossibly pointy and curvy, maybe even something out of like Tim Burton or Nightmare Before Christmas, that he's going for. So it's all so surreal, and yet, there's something about his aesthetic that, I don't know, I partially learned how to draw or change my drawing style, from the Buscema drawing, in how to draw comics the Marvel way, Stanley and Buscema, learning that and mimicking that. And then my next influences were like Joe Madureira and McDaniel. So it couldn't be more, and Sabakala. So it couldn't be more, alternate or far from the house style at the time of like, Buscema and Romita. So this is like really fun to see this again, and new art from him for me, it's new. So I really, on the art side of things, I really did enjoy my time with this. I did find, especially as the story went on, it got harder and harder to tell what was going on in some of the panels, which is true of also some of Bacalo's stuff, and it does happen as well with McDaniel. Sometimes there's too many darks, or it's too heavy shadow, or he's being very creative. But for the most part, I was able to, I like it when I can go page to page and pretty much give an idea of what's going on in the story, just from not even reading a word, and I think he covers it for the most part. So I enjoyed the art.
It's interesting. I did feel like as I was going through it, I could feel the stylistic shift within McDaniel, because it's not quite like his Daredevil stuff, but as you said, it's a lot closer to what we were getting from his Green Goblin stuff. And so in terms of some of the expressiveness, it's not as dark and muddy as at times the Daredevil stuff could be. It was still good, but he was definitely playing in a lot of blacks, and I don't know if always the inkers and colorists could match what he was trying to do, in terms of some of the depth of what was available at the time. I did think at times that Chichester was writing Daredevil almost more, if he had been wearing the black armor, I think in some ways the story would have read better. Because I guess in my mind, I think of Matt when he was wearing the black armor being a harder edge character, and the way that Chichester approached him back during Fall from Grace, he kind of started to feel different, but it was during a very particular difficult period in his life, and it was kind of easy to be like, okay, well, this is this guy who's really been pushed again. We saw that during Born Again, and we saw him go crazy in Born Again. Like, this guy does go crazy and like kind of lose himself. And here he feels at times very aggressive and kind of angry. And it's not always what I think of Daredevil, but it is what I think of a specific version of Daredevil. And so part of me was like, I think if I squint and just pretend he's wearing the armor, it almost makes it easier to be like, yeah, that feels like that Daredevil. And that makes sense that Chichester just wrote that Daredevil a couple of years earlier, that he would have channeled that version of the character into how he was portrayed here.
Yeah, he's definitely less of the swashbuckler that Mark Waid kind of tries to bring back, or does bring back in his run, which is like from the early run of, or the early stories of Daredevil. Like as soon as you get into it and they meet each other, he's like a little stinker. Like he's even the way McDaniel draws him. There's a part where Bats throws a few batarangs at him. I do like the black background with the white highlights to show the interpretation of the radar. Which kind of comes back from Fall from Grace and other stories by McDaniel. And then he's like, okay, well, looks, throws the batarangs. And then Matt goes, looks more to me like you want to play catch. And then McDaniel has this kind of smirk. I don't know if like it's showing up, but like there's this very smirky face. And then they're like, oh, they're beating the tar at each other. And then they stop and he goes, Matt goes, we can just kill each other. Guess where part of me's hoping you'll place your bet. And he had another kind of sneer or a wicked smile, hoping that Bats will either beat each other to death, or that they actually can go on a little fun detective mission together. So there are a number of moments, even when Bats speeds away in his in the Batmobile and takes off. Matt looks at him, burning rubber, and then he goes, "That's son of a," and then he cuts off the cursing with another smirk. So there is a lot of that edge that you're right. It's kind of weird to see him in the bright red, so edgy.
Because in the armor he was always like this. I mean, and I guess it's so interesting how I make the connection of a particular version of that character, and this just feels like him. It's not like I don't like it. I just find it interesting, and at times, it's an interesting juxtaposition because you're right. He's kind of making smart ass comments, so he's a little bit kind of a lighter tone in some ways, but there's also a tinge of darkness to a lot of those comments as well. So like he'll throw out some barbs, but at the same time, like this guy feels like he has a death wish in a way that we're not used to seeing with Daredevil.
Like a game of chicken with Batman. Like he just stands in the road and goes, "Okay, I'm going to see if he'll hit me." Like that's a hardcore, very 90s, grungy type kind of move, isn't it?
I do find it fascinating and as we go through our crossover omnibus, I think we see more of this where we have this conceit that they live on the same Earth, and yet they always seem so surprised to meet each other. Like you don't think that they would somehow have reps, but again, it's an Elseworlds. It's meant to be, its own thing, and we're supposed to just kind of go with it, which is fine. And I'm not in any way upset with anyone for that. It's just an interesting, fun part of the conceit that, they're not, and I do appreciate they're not spending the time to explain how there's dimensional barriers or anything like that. Like we're just jumping in, having a story. They happen to coexist. It makes sense from a storytelling perspective to not have to add in so many extra layers that have nothing to do with the story just to have these two characters have an adventure together. It's just an interesting thing to note. As we speak, I'm looking through this omnibus and I don't see any other delineation about an Elseworlds. So this appears to be maybe the only one that says it's an Elseworlds in the opening page.
So if you're an Elseworlds collector and you don't have this issue, you got to get on it,
right?
Because it's technically an Elseworlds.
It's really interesting.
Batman. Also, I found. I don't know Batman in this era. I haven't read Nightfall, and this is post Nightfall. I don't know that he is this sarcastic and really, really mean in this era. So I can't speak to
You found him mean?
Yeah, he was constant. His introduction, the first thing he says, "I had some questions. You appear intent on providing all the wrong answers." Like everything is a jab at him. Everything is about how Daredevil's an idiot, how he's incompetent at fighting. It was constant. I found the whole thing. Like it was like you aren't smart enough to figure this out. I don't need you. You can leave. If you're considering sharing resources, my experience is the other side generally comes up short. Almost every line out of his face is how Daredevil can't handle it, and he's not as good as at Batman as being Batman. Or sorry, at Batmaning, vigilanteing.
Interesting. To me, that felt completely accurate. Like he's like that a lot, and he does suspect others. He has this supreme confidence in himself and that he is superior to others. Not unlike, it's not hard to see Batman potentially being a villain for that reason because he's kind of on that razor's edge. But this actually felt pretty accurate to what I read Batman to often hold himself. Not always.
I know. He's certainly gruff, but I also find that there are times when, like, usually in a crossover, eventually he kind of goes, yeah, you know what? It's okay. It's good that we've teamed up. But I think the entire thing, all the way to the end, it's just like, even at the very end, he's basically like, stay out of my city, idiot. Like, there's no kind of like moment where he looks at Superman and goes, you know what, this guy's all right. The entire,
but I kind of like that, actually, because I think that's I think what I appreciated about that is it's almost a trope that you have, the two heroes, what do, right? They misunderstand each other, they fight each other, they team up together, and now they're friends. And I kind of like that they're not. That they don't like each other. They work together. They're able to, defeat the villain of the piece or the villains. But that they're not going to be friends and they don't want to do this again. And that, now again, Murdoch himself feels, and again, it's interesting. And I didn't do this on purpose because it'd been a year since I'd read it, but it's interesting to have had you read Black Armor and this, because the Matt Murdock characterization is actually pretty consistent between those two books. Because here where he's like daring Bruce at the end, and he's like, why, Mr. Wayne, are you daring me? Like, he's being very, like, not necessarily the Matt that we're used to from, Bendis, et cetera. Like, he's not that version, but he's this flippant kind of jerk. But that's Jack Batlin. Like, that was what he did at the time, which again is why it's so interesting to me that he's not wearing the armor to ground that version of the character in that portrayal, because I feel like the portrayal is that version. But I kind of like that they were adversarial and that they don't give each other an inch. And, but again, that only works for this version of Daredevil, because most versions of Daredevil would be a good team player and would not be like this. But Jack Batlin would.
I found it was a gruff off. It was two McGruffs, detectives gruffing off. And when two heroes gruff, there are no winners, right? I just found like, usually you have a straight character and the character who's the silly character, right? And then they're like, Spider-Man and Deadpool are interesting because Spider-Man, who's usually the goof, ends up being the straight man to Deadpool. And people can't stand Deadpool, and Spider-Man's known for his annoying chatter, and some people really push back on whatever. Superman's straight-lacedness. I get that. But they're both the gruff. And I also found, I didn't find there was any reason for Batman to be pushing back on him too. Like, Daredevil doesn't do anything wrong. Like, he's investigating a crime scene and he happens to get some blood on his glove because he's blind, and doesn't realize it. Although Matt would, he'd be able to tell because of the sensitivity, even through his gloves, that there's a liquid on his, but never mind. And then Batman immediately is like, you're an idiot, you're an idiot, you're an idiot. And then like Matt tries to open up a little bit and be like, well, we're going to do this thing where we're both using our skills to suss out the other person and figure out who they are. And like Batman's like, well, you seem to be cocking your head to the sound of things, and it shows that maybe you're limited in your sight and your olfactory acuteness is alerted with your flaring nostrils. And then Daredevil goes, yeah, your skills ain't half bad either. And he tells them something about how like, oh, I've got a connection to Harvey Dent, and then Bats goes, an interesting, careless, and pointless admission. I'm like, no, it wasn't pointless and maybe careless, but he's kind of extending an olive branch. So for me, there was nothing that Matt really does that, if it was Deadpool, absolutely, you can slam on him the entire time. He is a buffoon, and there's lots of things that you can dislike.
It's interesting because when he says that, it did make me think of when we read, was it Web of Death, and you had Spider-Man and Daredevil talking to each other. And Spider-Man says some stuff about how like we shared each other's identities and all this stuff, and Daredevil's a real jerk about it. It did remind me of that, which I thought was funny, although that wasn't written by Chichester either. I didn't take it as negative and gruff as you did. I thought it was more of an interesting, like Batman is so protective of his identity, of everything he does. He doesn't want other people in Gotham. Now there's some guy he doesn't know running around Gotham. That would not sit well with any version of Batman. He's very territorial.
Why would he not know? He should know everybody in this universe.
But he shouldn't be there. He should be in New York. It wouldn't matter who you are. Don't come to Gotham. Stay out of Gotham. This is my place. So again, that felt very accurate to Batman. He's like, and so it makes sense to me that Batman would be like, why are you telling me something that I could use to figure out who you are? I would look down on you for that. Like, that felt accurate to Batman. I thought the Batman portrayal was actually pretty spot on for me because it felt, especially at this period, post Nightfall, like he's starting to wear more armor. They're starting to kind of lean into the Bat-God of it all. I think around this time you have JLA by Grant Morrison, I think came out this year. So you're starting to lean into a specific version of Batman. This didn't feel extra gruff. It just felt just right to me, and it felt pretty accurate.
Yeah, I haven't read JLA yet. I have it on my shelf. As I said, I wasn't reading Batman at the time. I didn't know if this was so you're saying it's consistent with that. I just was kind of like, it was a lot for me to have someone say to Matt, who is brilliant, like this whole like over the top fantasy mythologizing of Batman is this ridiculous uber detective who's not like the world's greatest detective. It's not the Sherlock Holmes. It's like he can know things that no one can know. Would he really be surprised if anyone just goes, yeah, you're the world's greatest detective. I'm not even going to bother trying to hide my identity from you. It doesn't really matter. You're a good guy anyway. I shouldn't have to hide it. And then have him say things like, redeem your dignity. Stop asking stupid questions. Like, geez, are you a hero of any kind? So I don't know. Like,
I guess to me, I just thought, I thought it leaned into his arrogance. And which is Batman's flaw. And like, but when he wears the blue and the gray, I want a bit of mirth. You go all black costume, I get it. But you wear the blue and the gray. So it's ironic, right? Because like red costume Daredevil isn't really swashbuckling, and blue costume Batman isn't really kind of doing his little Silver Age smirk. They're both in like the colored uniforms, and they're both just like going at each other with the gruffness. So I'm like, maybe a bit of whiplash for me, or an odd juxtaposition for me, but it's whatever. Because outside of the first couple of pages, I feel like you don't usually see any of the kind of the blue highlights on anything that Batman's wearing. Like in that first couple of pages, you see more of the blue, and I feel like from then on it's pretty dark. McDaniel's keeping it pretty dark, and the colorist is too. Like there are moments where you'll see the gray and the blue, but yeah, both of them are doing a lot of like either shadow with the inks, or the colorist is doing a lot of dark colors as well. With the use of Mr. Hyde, so again, we don't really know why Mr. Hyde was selected for, this crossover honor, so to speak. I love the use of Two-Face. I thought that did make sense to me, and I did like how he was used. I didn't understand what reference material McDaniel was using for Hyde, though, because besides like there's one shot of like a flashback to Calvin Zabo, that does look accurate. But then from then on, like he just doesn't feel like he just doesn't match any interpretation of Hyde I've ever really seen. And so that did throw me off and kind of take me out of it a little bit. In terms of how Hyde is written, I mean, he's on purpose, and this is, I guess, kind of an interesting choice too. He's not quite acting like the Hyde we know because of what's happening in the story, but that also makes me think like, okay, but then why not use another villain then? If he's not going to feel like the Hyde maybe I'm used to in Marvel Comics, then why use him at all? It's just, again, I'm just fascinated by his selection as the villain to represent Daredevil's side of the world. Because I think Bullseye would have been really cool. And Kingpin might have been harder to do, but I think Bullseye would have been great to see against Batman.
Yeah, they would be an interesting fight and more threatening in a way, even though Hyde is really physically imposing. This costume, whatever the choice is here, I haven't read every appearance of this character. Maybe this is being pulled from an issue that McDaniel enjoyed, but this costume, this design here is really giving to me like Little John in the Kevin Costner Robin Hood Prince of Thieves movie. Like it just feels like the folds and the kind of like the line work in it, and like there's a cloak with this it's a sleeveless like cloak or whatever, and a giant big old belt with a buckle in the middle. I don't know. It definitely feels like it would suit that movie better than. It's not giving it like a mid to late 90s vibe at all to me. So it's weird, but I guess it's just a fun, silly thing.
I do, after having read it, I do feel like at some point we need to read the next one, which is not connected, obviously, which is Daredevil Batman. Sorry, not Daredevil, but Batman Daredevil, I should say, which came out afterwards, which is later on in this particular omnibus, where we see the two characters reteamed, but with a very different creative team. We got Alan Grant, who had written a lot of Batman, and Eduardo Barreto, who again at that point was more on the DC side of things. So I'm curious at some point for us to read that. That one I've never read. I don't think I even knew it existed. This one I knew. Daredevil Batman, because I remember it was on the first issue of Marvel Vision magazine that I ever actually read. And the cover was a nice, really cool shot of Daredevil and Batman, which I don't believe is here. It might have just been promotional art for that cover. And I just always loved that cover. So I always knew that there was a crossover. Because I had seen that. But besides that, I don't think I'd ever actually read this crossover before. I think my mileage was probably better than yours. Because I think the Batman of it all worked for me. I understand why it didn't quite work for you. And I think we were both confused by Hyde. How did you feel about the use of Two-Face and the integration of the, Harvey Dent and Matt Murdock as having a past?
Yeah, that lawyer thing is fun. They do he does a kind of an arc. I guess they is more accurate, with the multi-creators of this. There's an arc, right, where he goes, in their childhood, there's a comment where Harvey's talking about a need for balance and even jumping on a statue of justice and going like, hey, Matt, I'm going to fall off and the statue's going to fall down if you don't balance it. I need a counterbalance. And so he talks Harvey into, forget your coin. Your coin is too random. Right now you've done too much death. You've done too much bad. So do a good. And he's like, okay, I will do a good. And I'm like, okay. And then and that was the death of the last bit of Harvey Dent. I'm like, wow, that's actually like some kind of character development of in an Elseworlds that doesn't count. That's like an interesting kind of very tragic kind of moment that almost is, lost here. But, other than that, I didn't feel that the other stuff that was going on was particularly Harvey Dent-y. It wasn't anything. It was there's a lot of clearly Chichester is into video games or technology at this point. There's a lot of stuff about microchips, and there's an entire page just likening life to an arcade game. And it's this Two-Face going on and on about why quarters are so important to you people. And the arcade game Primal Rage is referenced at one point, which is very much this kind of of the zeitgeist. And then it's they're stealing these chips, and there's even a comment, I think by Daredevil about the precious copper, or this expensive copper that was stolen. Oh, the copper! There's such an attention on metal bullion and its value, and a TV news reporter at one point talks about low rent crimes. I'm like, oh, this is a news reporter is concerned about people in low income housing suffering from crime. No, it's people aren't motivated enough or interested enough to learn about the microchip theft. And we need to learn more. We need to pay more attention to these corporations that are having their microchips stolen. And this is a shame. I'm like, what is I don't understand. So the messaging I felt was lost on me. And then and then you're like, oh, are they going to build a big old robot out of it or something? No, they're mostly going to sell them off, to a buyer. And then also there's a secret plan to turn Hyde into one of these biocomputers, presumably to do more evil things. But I often find it got muddled or lost. It didn't really feel very Two-Facey. So it is kind of your ultimately run-of-the-mill supervillain plan to do a bad thing. And the heroes have to stop them before they do the bad thing. But, the storyline that kind of ends, or the arc that kind of ends with the loss of the last humanity. And the two heroes are arguing over it too, right? Well, no, Batman's he's evil, he's got to go, and there's nothing redeeming about it. And then Matt's kind of got that, what is it? His reckless idealism, about how there's good in him. And then in the end, Matt was right. There was good in him. But then Batman's also right, because that good is gone now. So that's an interesting resolution that I felt could have used more time with it, rather than just kind of a flashback. And then, by the way, here's the end of the third act. But I did like that there was some kind of payoff at the end. That was at least nice.
And you got to have the two heroes saying the same thing at the same time?
Well, that's both their motto, apparently. Both of their motto, and we're going to say it at the same time now, Adam, right? 3, 2, 1, then rest
in peace.
So that's what they say. That's what they knew what they were going to say. So now you and I, whenever we say goodbye to each other or something, I'm going to tell you to then rest in peace. Or when we defeat a villain in Marvel United, that should be what we tell them.
Oh, yeah, we have to say it at the same time. We should probably hold hands.
And Paul can't know about this conversation. We're going to do it. We're going to lock eyes, and he's going to not know. Okay? That's our deal.
See, what's going to happen is he's going to look at this. He's going to know we did something, and then he's just going to go, this is evidence.
Well, he knows Kane very well.
He does. Any final thoughts on this one shot? There's a lot, again, there was a lot going in. There's a lot, it's interesting near the end is when I feel like we get the most kind of splashes of color from the colorist. It's got a very kind of dour dark look for most of the book. And right near the end, when you finally have like things are on fire, I guess that's what it takes. Finally, the color palette feels a lot lighter. Although I guess, you also have the red of Daredevil does puncture the darkness at times.
Yeah, overall, I would say I enjoy the colors. I know, like, there's a mission statement, and Gregory Wright understood it, but there's a lot of greens, of different lighting. There's a number of uses of warm colors as well, like the sewers. There's a choice to kind of go with like yellow lighting at the overhead lights, and so there's a nice kind of warm coloration there. So as the story goes on, there's this certain choices in different scenes. They are differentiated, like they have the kind of the brownie kind of colors on the flashback, and then nice skylines. Again, use of like green as a highlight in the Batmobile. Like every page or every few pages, it really feels like it's a new place, a new setting, and there are color choices in the backgrounds that often will guide the eye to kind of know, okay, well this act is done and we're moving on somewhere else. So kudos to the colorist. I really enjoyed the coloring in this.
So I was looking at Daredevil's appearances around this time. And so July 96 in Daredevil was 354. Part of the synopsis says, that Matt accepts this person's offer to become a partner in her law firm, and his first assignment is to defend one of Daredevil's oldest enemies, Mr. Hyde. In the next issue's description, it says after a blazing battle of Pyro, where he learns that Hyde is innocent of the crime, Daredevil agrees to take the case. So this is multiple issues with Hyde. Matt and Foggy begin their defense of Mr. Hyde as they move into their new offices. So there's a whole subplots and plots with Hyde. Daredevil is supposed to be in court defending Mr. Hyde, but he's been captured by the enforcers. So it looks like, maybe we were kind of wrong that Mr. Hyde was actually playing a big part of current contemporary Daredevil comics, while this was happening, or in and around when this would have been created. So I'm as I said, interested to talk to Chichester about it, but I guess this might be the reason why he ended up being the villain selected, is that he was pretty prominent in the Daredevil book at the time. And again, Daredevil had just come off a protracted run where there had been a lot of kind of shenanigans with his identity and kind of a lot of darkness. And so finally the character was kind of coming into a period of lightness. Carrie Nord was the artist. Carl Kiesel was writing it. So I guess all the pieces are starting to fit a little bit more, so I'm curious to talk to Chichester a bit more to kind of nail down some of these pieces, but I guess that's why we got Hyde here.
Okay, I'm sure this will be the most questions, even if it's one question, that he has or will have received about Mr. Hyde, so I hope he can look forward to that unpacking.
So a couple years ago, before I brought back the podcast, and one of the first things that I wish I had the podcast back to talk about was we had an announcement, I forget which con it was at, that we were going to get a return to Daredevil in the black armor, and Chichester was going to be doing one of these so-called like kind of nostalgia miniseries that they've been doing at Marvel. And so this was a big deal for a lot of reasons. First of all, I laughed when I saw the announcement because Chichester was talking about the black armor, and one of the first questions I think I asked him when he came back on the show, right when I was bringing the podcast back, was he always refused to accept that it was an armor. He always said, like, it's not an armor, it's got this stuff on it, but it's not armor. And Daredevil says that, a couple times here, that it's not actually armor.
It's like every issue.
Yeah, which I kind of like that he's not afraid to kind of lean in on that, even though it's called black armor. Now I will say, as we're recording this, in I think a month or two, there's going to be a time jump in the regular Daredevil comic that's being published right now, and he's going to be wearing in current continuity this black costume again, or this black armor costume again. So as much as this, we're reading it from a nostalgic perspective, set in a very specific time frame in Matt's life, he's about to be wearing it again, which is kind of an interesting thing. Like, this is an armor where for a lot of times people used to make fun of it, and obviously there's enough fans of that period and of Daredevil in that costume that we're getting returns to it. And now he's actually going to be wearing it, at least for the short period, in the regular book. So prior to you, I guess, reading this in Marvel Unlimited, I don't think, besides me kind of mentioning that, again, that this book was happening at some point, I don't think you really knew much about this going in, correct?
Yep, correct.
Now, have you ever seen any art by Netho Diaz before? Because I don't believe I had either.
Not to my memory, no. This is new for me as well as an artist.
Okay. So this is a return, and it's very much set in a very specific period. That being said, it's one of those things where if I put my continuity hat on, it hurts a little because like there's some stuff that I'm not sure if it fits or if it quite works. Like there's a moment with Daredevil and Spider-Man, and I'm probably the person who loves Daredevil, Black Costume Daredevil and Spider-Man's first meeting in Amazing Spider-Man 396 more than anyone. So that was very much stuck out to me as like, wait a minute, that was supposed to be their first meeting. They write this like this is supposed to be their first meeting. That bugged me, but that's only because I'm a hardcore continuity nut. It would bother no one else but me, but it's one of those things that stuck out.
Yeah, I guess it didn't feel to me like it was a super first meeting, but there are clues, yeah, where he's kind of like, who are you? So I guess that's a valid point, and it does feel like this is a second first meeting. So I'm sorry that kind of topples or gives some tension to your beloved original continuity. But I don't know, is this an Elseworlds or something? Cross my fingers, maybe? I don't know.
I mean, it's one of those things that it doesn't make a difference. Like, it doesn't really hurt the story. Like, it's fun to kind of see how this interpretation of Matt deals with people. And because at the time, we didn't get to see a lot of it because they were kind of running through the stories pretty fast. And so we didn't really get to kind of see, like, I thought this was a kind of a nice slower pace in a lot of ways for an exploration of where Matt was at this point in his life. I do think it may be hard for people who aren't aware of it to kind of jump into it because it really is set in a very specific time and place. And if you don't really know about it, even though it kind of tries to tell you, but it tells you more, and I appreciate this in the visual medium. You know, it has a big splash page where it kind of shows you elements from the storylines that would have been happening around this time, but it doesn't give a lot of context for it. I almost feel like, you know, I don't like it when there's an excessive amount of captions and narrative boxes, but I feel like this is probably one of those moments where it would have been probably okay. Because if you don't know Daredevil, I mean, I guess if you don't know Daredevil, why are you picking this up? But you never know. Someone could pick this up and be like, oh, that looks cool. And then you get to the splash page, you're like, there's a lot of characters here. There's Morbius, Silver Sable, Venom, you know, that demonic kind of beast character from during Fall from Grace. You got Venom. You know, all these, they got the Snake Root character. They're all here, but there's not a lot of context as to who they are and why they matter. And so I wish that Chichester had done more to kind of ground you on this is where we are at this point. So that it would make more sense for a more casual reader who hadn't just read Fall from Grace and Tree of Knowledge.
And then also what always happens is you look back and you're trying to situate yourself in these times and places, and then you make choices about technology. And there's a reference to a non-YouTube in this. Like someone watched something on they don't call it YouTube. So there's references to like internet video streaming things that you just have to kind of not think too hard about. And you're like, well, this isn't in that time period. Like, well, no, this would be the Marvel continuity, and that's slower. So really, late 90s isn't late 90s in the conceit of like the 616 universe because it keeps sliding, the time scale keeps sliding. So, yeah, first meetings with Spider-Man was Sabretooth really wearing this costume in this time. I think he was actually, but like those are the kinds of things that you just kind of have to roll with. Yeah, but it won't be long before he's in the furs, right? Once the movie comes out.
I mean, overall, I mean, I think I probably maybe enjoyed this a little bit more than you did. I thought it was a fun romp, because I do think that's what it was. I did like the flashback that kind of goes throughout where Matt is watching his dad train this other guy, and he's trying to take those lessons on himself because obviously his dad would never teach him how to fight, but he wants to learn and he wants to be like his dad. And I really thought that resonated, and I thought that made a lot of sense for the character because Jack would never want to know that his son is there at the gym, especially that he's listening to him, because he wants Matt to be better than him. He wants him to not, because, you know, Jack is such a character who's so down on himself and doesn't ever want to believe that his son would ever be like him. Wants his son to be so much better. So it's interesting because he wants so much more for his son, but at the same time, he's like not establishing a better parental connection because, of course, by pushing his son away from his life and what he's done, it just makes Matt want to be that all the more. And so I thought that was a really interesting way of having Matt try to kind of come to terms with that kind of very maturely, even as a kid, being like, I know my dad doesn't want me to see this. I won't let him see, but I still need to be like my dad. So I really thought that really worked for me. I don't know how you felt about that. We've seen different versions of that play out in different writers in the past, but I'm curious what you thought of that.
Oh, we're going to talk about it. We both love Batman Jack Murdoch. We both love Zeb Wells' work in that book. If there's two things I know about you, Adam, it's that you love heartfelt stories about people who become parents of children who aren't their birth children. You love the adoption story of the Supermans, of the Peter Parkers, of the maybe even Stick. You love